Thank you all for coming along this morning. So we're here to talk about GDPR. Now, as I go through the slides, if there's any questions or any comments that you want to make, just come in with them. Don't feel that you've got to wait till the end. But I shall be here for a little while afterwards as well. So if there's any other questions that you've got, then just come and grab me and ask them. Okay, so we're here to talk about GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations that are coming into force on the 25th of May this year. Now, lots of you will be aware of it with emails and things that have come through from local authorities. And you'll also probably have seen quite a lot in the press recently, usually with phone companies where they've been breached because they've released all the information about customers. So it is something that's quite a lot in the press at the moment because it is due to come out soon. But one of the things that we're going to cover is that there are changes, but it's not masses away from where it is now. So the first thing I want to say is that if you're all following everything that you need to under the Data Protection Act currently, then you're going to be fine. There's just a few things that I need to make you aware of and some extra requirements that we'll go through. But say if you've got any questions, then give me a shout. Okay, so what is GDPR? So as I said, it's the General Data Protection Regulations. It's European regulations, but we don't get out of it because of Brexit and everything going through there. It will affect us because of links that we have with Europe, with our cloud providers. So it is something that we still need to be aware of. And although it's a European regulation, it will be incorporated into UK law. So currently we have the Data Protection Act 1998, and they will be replaced with a new act that's coming out. So it's in draft form at the moment, and we're still waiting for the final bill when it's been approved. So there'll be some things that are still being clarified as a result of that, but it will be incorporated into our legal system. Okay. So, as I say, it's new regulations that are coming into place, and they're going to come out on the 25th of May this year. Quite there from the UK Information Officer. So there is a lot of, as I said, from the GDPR that you're going to recognise that you currently follow from the Data Protection Act. But there's also some changes that we need to make you aware of. One of the things is looking at whether everyone is compliant with the data protection regulations. So there's certain things that we'll need to look at to make sure that you can demonstrate that compliance. And the new regulations are going to be more tightly enforced with heavier fines and stronger protection for individuals. Now we'll go through some of the slides later that will show all about the rights for the individuals to make you all aware of. The fines, those affect more in terms of the private sector, so it can be up to 20 million euros. Now obviously with the academy trusts and schools, we don't have the turnover, we don't have the profits to be affected, but what we do have is the reputation of the schools and trusts. So what we want to do is to make sure we're compliant, we're doing everything we need to, because obviously if it does get out into the public arena that there has been a breach, then we have effects to our reputation as a trust. Schools are also best placed to demonstrate what it means for children. So one of the requirements and one of the changes about that stronger protection for individuals also affects children. Now within the regulations within UK law, there's no legal age which you say that a child is mature enough to be able to exercise their own rights, but we use the age of about 12. So what that means is secondary school children are deemed to be mature enough that they can request sight of their own data. For primary school, obviously affecting yourselves, it will come through their parents. But what it means is that you at schools can model that behaviour, you can show what it's like to be clear and transparent about the individual rights. You can cover off what it means for them with child-friendly material, so whether it's clear privacy notices, whether it's cartoons and work that you can do. So that will set them up that when the children are within secondary school, they'll be a lot more aware of their rights. So, as I say, GDPR, new regulations coming out, and what it says under the regulations is that personal data must be processed lawfully, fairly and in a transparent manner. And one of the things that you might be aware of is privacy notices that we'll also go to in a bit more detail, but that's being about very transparent about what data you store at schools within the trust, how you'll share it, how people can access it. So it's about being very transparent. Needs to be collected for specified, explicit and legitimate purposes. So it's all about the reasons why you're holding that data. So one of the requirements is to be very clear about why you're holding it, and I'll go through what those lawful reasons can be in a bit. But it's no longer enough to have information because you think it might come in useful, it might come in handy at that point. And we in HR are great at, try and keep everything because we think, something might come up. But ourselves and all of you just needs to be a lot more aware of how long you can keep the information for. And what we'll be doing is producing a whole toolkit of information. I'll go through that towards the end, but one of those will be a retention policy that will be very clear about what data you can hold and for how long. So it gives you some timelines that you know when you need to delete that information. And the data needs to be adequate, relevant and limited to what's necessary. So again, it's all about keeping that data for the purpose that it has to be stored and making sure that it is relevant for that purpose. It has to be accurate and up to date. And kept in a form that permits identification of data subjects for no longer than is necessary. So again, all around those timings for how long you're having to keep that information. And processed in a way that ensures appropriate security. Now we're also working with the IT department to make sure that the systems we've got in place are making sure that it's secure from an IT point of view. But obviously security also means when you're emailing information around or when your teachers are physically taking books home to mark or any information that they're carrying around with them. Okay. So, as I say, there is a Data Protection Act currently, and there will be significant changes that are really around these areas. So, greater emphasis on demonstrating compliance. So, it's all about showing that you are being compliant with things that you're probably doing anyway, because you need to be obviously compliant with the Data Protection Act. But it's being able to evidence that if you need to show that you've done all that you can, you've taken all reasonable steps to be compliant. Stronger and additional rights for individuals. Now, one of these is the right for subject access requests. Now, I don't know if any of you have received any subject access requests within school? No? Usually, at this point, people have got their heads in their hands if they have received, because they're well aware of what it takes to get that data. That's a right currently under the Data Protection Act, so it's a right that continues. But what it means, and I will go through it in a bit more detail, is that an individual has the right to see all the data that's held about them. And when you think of all the data that you store at the school, you have on your system, you have on your emails, it can be quite a lot. So if someone is requesting sight of that, there's quite a lot of material to go through. Mandatory data breach reporting in certain cases. So again, what this as I say, that we'll get a toolkit, and one of the policies to be issued is around data breaches. But it means under certain cases, you have to report that to the Information Commissioner's Office. What it probably will be is that there will be a committee, there will be a group of people that decide whether it's a serious breach or not. But if for serious breaches, it does need to be reported to the ICO. And more severe consequences are getting it wrong. As I say, the fines, the huge amounts, more for the public sector, but we have got to be mindful of the reputation. Now, before I go on to the next slide, obviously I keep saying about there's a lot of data you store. What can you think that kind of information that you would be holding at schools? What information, what data would you store? Anything can you think of? What kind of information?
Medical records?
Yeah, yeah, for employees and for pupils.
Names and addresses, personal data.
Yeah.
Telephone numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their forms.
Yeah. Because you think you've got all your staff, you've got your pupils, so you've got a lot of personnel there with a lot of information that you're storing. So when you think it covers electronic information, it covers paper copies, it covers anything that you're holding on a person, it can add to quite a lot of information. Okay, so yeah. Saying it's information about pupils, it's potential pupils, when you've got people coming around to look at the school. Got former pupils, you've got staff, you're saying names and addresses, all the information. Job applicants, so not even the people that you eventually take on, you've got all that information that's stored as a result of them applying. Former employees, so when it's always a knowing sort of when you actually then get rid of that information that you're keeping on staff that have worked for you. Parents and families, so with the information through parent pay, information you store about them on any of the systems, consultants and contractors, governors and trustees. So there's a lot of information that you're going to store there. Now, in terms of what is personal data, and there is that differentiation between data that you store, whether you're looking at statistics, you're looking at the results, and what's personal data. Personal data means any information from which you can identify an individual. So it's under the terms, the definition within the draft bill is an identified living individual is a living individual that can be identified directly or indirectly by reference to things like names, identification number, location data, online identifier, or one or more factors specific to the physical, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, social identity. Now what this means is that things like nicknames, aliases, things that you have on Facebook, on Instagram, anything that you can identify that individual from will mean that they are an identifiable individual and therefore it comes under personal data. So some of the questions that come out of other sessions, if I just take out, or if I go with first names and I take out second names, if you can identify who that is, then it's still applicable. And obviously it has to be identified to a certain extent, otherwise you wouldn't know who you're talking about. So just sort of give some kind of factor on what it is that you're talking about. So it's information that relates to that individual, and it's not just factual, it's opinions as well. Now where that will come into is if you receive a subject access request and someone says, I want to see all the data that you hold about me. It can be emails that you've had about, what are they going on about? If you're not so being, what you have to think about is anything that you're storing, make sure that you'd be happy for that to be disclosed if it was requested. So things like text messages that go between staff, emails when you're talking about, you think that they're acted in an inappropriate way. Anything that is a record that you can tell that person from, that will be disclosable on a subject access request. So the main thing, as I say, is really just to be conscious of what you are revealing, what you are emailing about, what you're texting about. So if you're having sort of a bit of a tricky conversation about someone, it's best to pick up the phone and make sure you're not doing it over email or text or something, because that information might need to come up. Any questions for any of that to go through? I am aware GDPR is quite a big one for a Monday morning as everyone gets into the week. So, okay. Now, lawful processing. So on the slides before, I talked about the reasons why you're storing and you're using data. Now, under the regulations, there are 6 lawful bases for processing data. And what that means is processing. It means you're storing it, you're using it, you're sending it to people when you need to. You're using it in a way that you have to carry out the roles. So there are 6 of these bases. So the first one is that it's necessary for performance of the contract. So we mentioned there about names and addresses. In order to carry out the employment contract, you obviously need to hold some information about the individuals. You need their basic data, you need bank data, because assuming that everyone wants to be paid. So you've got that lawful reason for having that information because you need it to carry out the employment relationship. Necessary for compliance with the legal obligation. So one of this would be like right to work. You need to prove, everyone needs to prove that they're legally entitled to work in the UK. So you'll hold a copy of their driver's licence, say, or their passport. You'll ask for some very personal data, but you're holding that data to comply with the legal obligation. To protect the vital interests of the data subject. So like medical records, you mentioned. Things like that again, it's very personal. It might be the medication they're under, it might be the effects they're suffering, an occupational health report, but you're holding that data because it's in the vital interest that you need to have that information if there's an accident or something happens to that person. So again, it's very personal, but there is that reason to hold it. Performance of a task carried out in the public interest. So these things would be things like DBS check. You obviously need to do all the the necessary checks to have a member of staff working for you. So in terms of public interest, you need to check that that person is safe to be in your school and working. Legitimate interests pursued by the controller. Usually things like, say, mortgage applications. So banks would hold information because they need to work through the application. And the data subject's given their consent. Now I've got this one last in the bases. It's one of the ones that's clear in a way. So usually the thing most comes up is parents giving consent for the child's image to be used on the website or any other kind of marketing material. We'll go through this in a bit, but there are some changes to what that consent needs to look like. It needs to be a lot more explicit and clear. Whereas now you might say, no, let me know if you're not happy for that to be used in a certain way. Under the changes here, you need to be very clear about what you'll be using that image for, and the person giving the permission to use it, so usually the parents, would need to understand why you're going to use that data, why you're going to use that photo. Because people can withdraw their consent at any time, and what that means is if a parent says, actually, no, I don't want my child's image on the website, you have to remove it. So why I'm saying that that's last is what you might say, even though someone doesn't give their consent to something, you still need to keep that data for certain reasons. So it wouldn't be enough, say, for someone to say, right, I'm aware that I've got a disciplinary record, I don't want that to be stored, I'm withdrawing my consent. You need it there, obviously, to fulfil that contract, you need to have that record. So it's not enough that they don't consent to it. Same as, say, to CCTV imaging. If you've got that for security around the site, you don't have to request individual consent if you're using it for another reason. So if you can rely on one of those other lawful bases, that's better, because it means that someone can't withdraw that consent.
You know, on your website, you have images of your staff on your website. Can they come along and say, I don't want my picture or my name on the school website?
The same, it's for staff, it's for parents, it's for children. So if they've got a reason for not wanting that.
Those excuses to keep it on.
Are you talking about sort of in public, just in the usual bit, where you say this is our staff?
Yeah.
I'd say for that, you've got a reason to keep that information because you're giving that to the parents so they've got a full understanding of who's there. So that, in that case, that would be separate from a parent giving their child's permission. You just need to be careful to which one you're using. So you could say, I'm trying to think which one would be. If it's performance of contract, say if it's part of that employment agreement that you're very clear about what staff you have working there, you're not again giving...
Contracts then, wouldn't we?
We wouldn't need to necessarily be explicit in the contracts as such, but I'm thinking of which basis that you could use. If you're doing it because you want to allow all your parents to see what staff you have working there, there's no information really that they wouldn't get from going into the school. Like all in that class, all the parents be aware who the class teacher is. So you're not then revealing any personal data that they wouldn't be able to get another way. So although staff have rights to see what they've got, I'd say that would be a different requirement to actually having that under, this is year 1 teachers, this is year 2. Whereas it's quite different from a child, that you've got in the marketing material. Okay. So what the requirement for the schools is to be very clear about setting out what information is held, the purpose of the processing, and how we safeguard that information. So how we keep it safe, how we prevent any breaches, any information getting out. So consent. As I said, this is one of the reason I've got last, because there will be other reasons that you hold the data. And that's usually, if you can sort of use a phrase like it's a cherry on the cake, it makes it really clear why you're holding it, but there could well be other reasons. So consent needs to be freely given, specific, informed and unambiguous. So where data processing relies on consent, we need to be able to evidence that. So the biggest thing I guess that you would do would be writing out to parents to ask for permission to use the children's photos. Now, if your consent forms currently comply with all the new requirements, you don't need to redo them all. But usually what we tend to do is we do like people can opt out rather than opt in. The same like anything, if you sign up for something, you've usually got boxes. You used to have boxes that you say, just tick here if you don't want to receive information from third parties. What you notice yourself is that's now changing to you actually have to tick to say, yes, I am happy for you as a company to contact me, and yes, I am happy for my information to be shared with third parties. So it's the same with the consent forms for use of images. And what we'll do as part of the kit is we'll send out some templates for all the consent forms, so you don't all have to write those from scratch. But it'll be very clear to say, I consent to my child's image being used on the school website, or I consent to my child's image being used on in any kind of prospectus or marketing information that you're sending out. So it needs to be really clear about how you're going to use that data, but also making it very clear that that person can opt out at any time. So they have to know what that process is. If they get to the point they don't want the information to be shared or used, they need to know how they can withdraw that consent. So that's all about making sure that it's freely given. You're not just doing it by default. You're making somebody think about using the information, and you're being very clear about how you're using it. And as I say, there's that stronger expectation that individuals opt in. So it involves that degree of thought rather than thinking that you just tick the box because it's one of those exercises. And as I say, especially as it concerns marketing material. So you'll see it from things you're using yourself. Okay, as mentioned, so under the regulations, individual rights are strengthened. So currently, individuals do have certain rights. As I say, subject access requests, or SAR, is something now. But what that probably will mean, because currently you're allowed to charge a minimal fee, £10 for that. That fee's been removed and the timelines have changed. And because there has been so much in the press about the regulations coming out and what it means, it's like with anything, and the more it's advertised that you've got the right, the more likely it is that more people are going to exercise that. So whereas it's something now that people might not be aware unless you've got some kind of dispute going on or something that they'd be aware of. So it is possible that you will receive more subject access requests. They also have the right to object if processing their personal data is causing unwarranted or substantial distress or damage. So this goes back to, again, I was saying about those legal bases. If someone says, I don't want you to use my data because it's causing me distress, if you can then go back and say, well, I'm holding your data for this reason and this is how I'm using it, it's an argument back to them to why you've got it. What you don't want, obviously, is to say, well, they'll not be able to justify why you're holding that information. Okay, so individual rights certainly strengthened and expanded under GDPR, and there is also a requirement to have more child-friendly notices to make it sort of very clear to children. And as I said, although it wouldn't necessarily affect you or us as a trust for primary schools, because they are under the age of 12, it's good to start that understanding for children, so as they go to secondary school they've got more awareness of it. Privacy notices. So yeah, individuals have that right to be told about, and that's all about what information you store. Again, being very clear, being very transparent, so no one's in any doubt about what information you hold and why you're holding it. And as I say, because they're free, this could possibly lead to more individuals. I'm not saying on the 25th of March you're going to have suddenly inundated with requests, but it's just something that you need to be aware of and what the processes for those are. Okay, so if we talk through the rights, so these, lots of little lists within the regulation. So there's the 6 lawful bases of processing data, and then there's the individual rights. So individuals have the right to object. And what this means is they have the right to say that their data shouldn't be stored, shouldn't be processed in the way that you're doing it. So and this is again going back to why you've got that lawful basis for why you're using it. So unless you can demonstrate compelling legitimate reasons to why you're using it, which override the right of that individual to say, I don't want you to use it, you'd need to have a real look into it. So let's say employee data is one of those. Someone might say that I don't want my name and address stored at the school, but you need to have that information. You need to be aware of the emergency contact details. You need to have their NI number. You need to have their bank details because you need it to go through that contract and to pay them. So you've got that legitimate reason. So although someone can object, if you've got a lawful reason for why you're holding the data, that overrides it. But if, say, there is some data that you're holding because just historically you have held it because it's a nice to have, if you can't say why you need it, then that's some information you've got to say you're going to have to delete or not use. Okay, the right to rectification basically means that individuals have the right for incorrect data to be corrected or to be completed. So if you're storing, say when you send out your information to staff, I don't know if you'll do a printout of what you hold on your information system and send it out, say every year for people to check if it's right. So if you're not holding any information there that is accurate, they've got the right to say change it, which you would do anyway as a matter of course. So it just means individuals, if they're aware that something that you store isn't accurate, they've got the right to say that that needs to be corrected. Now, if you've disclosed inaccurate or incomplete personal data to third parties, what you need to do is inform them that you have corrected that information. So you've taken all reasonable steps to make sure that information is correct. Say, or the census you need to complete, data goes across to the DFE. If something's been inaccurate in there, it's about making sure that that's correct so they've got all the information that they need. And it's all about just keeping people informed. So if somebody does exercise one of these rights and they make a request to change something, it's about keeping them in the loop. Say, okay, I've got this information, this is who I'm sharing it with. I've explained to you before in the privacy notices that this is who I need to share it with. And then because it's inaccurate, these are the steps that I've taken to change it. Okay, right to erasure. This is not the right to access material from the pop tour of the 80s. But it's also known as the right to be forgotten. So what that means is that the individual has the right to request the deletion of their personal data, so of their records, if the school no longer needs it. And again, I keep going back to those lawful bases. You can't exercise that right if you as a school are storing that data because you need it. What it can mean is, say, a former employee, if you've got the data that you're holding and it's outside of those retention periods, but you've still got it in your archive, if someone says, like, I want that gone, and there's no lawful reason why you need to keep it anymore, then you need to delete and destroy that data held about them.
Should somebody in that regard then subsequently ask for a reference, do you just turn around to the person that's asking for the reference and say, unfortunately, we erased that data because they asked us to?
Yeah. I mean, if there's under the retention policy, there'll be clear timelines of how long you need to keep it for. So obviously safeguarding data needs to be kept for a lot longer. There's certain requirements. But if it is outside of that period and you have, then yes, because you can't store that information. I mean, some, obviously within management information system, you'll have some of the data to give the dates on. But it's the same, like if it's been a lot of changeover in staff, sometimes it's quite hard to give references when staff members have moved on and you haven't got those files. So it would be if you're holding that data for longer and you've destroyed it, that's a completely reasonable response to that. Okay, doesn't apply where the personal data meets an exemption. So what that's talking about is, if you've got a reason to have it, you can't override it and say, I want my record deleted. And I used that example before of the disciplinary information. If you're holding it within that time frame that you've laid out in the letter, someone can't say, right, I want that record deleted completely, because you've got reasons for holding that. Okay, right to restriction. So if somebody, say, has come back to you and said, you're holding this information about me, I don't think it's right, and you're looking into it to see whether you do need to store it or whether they are correct in saying that it should be deleted, what you do is this is called the exercising the right to restriction, and it means that you're just storing that data. You're holding on to it for the time being while you make other inquiries, you look into it to see if you need to do something, whether you need to delete it. So you're not then passing it on to any third party that you need to, you're just keeping it your own records at school while you find out what you need to do with the information. So something like, the accuracy has been questioned and you're checking it. You're working out whether there are enough reasons to keep that data that overrides the individual right. The process is unlawful. So sometimes, I'm trying to think of an example for this. So there might be information that you don't need to actually keep, but a staff member has requested that you store because, say, they might be carrying out a civil case against an ex-partner or something that they've got going through. So they might ask you to restrict it. They don't want you to share that information, but they want you to still keep that at school. So if they have made that request, then that is a legitimate reason to hold it. And again, if you no longer need the personal data, but they require it, as I say, to defend a legal claim or to exercise that. So again, as with the right of rectification, where you tell somebody in the third party, there's also that requirement there to tell third parties about that personal data that you are restricting, that you're not issuing out for them.
Can I just ask, I'm assuming that if somebody has asked you to hold something on them that you don't necessarily need anymore, you'd need that evidenced in writing so that if you were then ever questioned why you still had it, you can prove that they requested you kept that.
Absolutely, yeah. So we mentioned before about that compliance, exactly, that's a perfect example, because it's something you don't need to have it, but you've got a reason for holding it. It's the same like consent forms would be a explicit reason to show that you're complying with it, and that would be right. Yeah, you'd have a printout of the email or something to show why you're holding it.
If you can't put it against one of those reasons as to why you're keeping it, you should have consent for no matter what it is. For why
or reason to why you're storing it, because say they want to, sort of establish or possibly exercise a legal claim later. Yeah, be a long way before you ever get paper free. Yeah. And if there is a restriction that you've made and then you're lifting it because they've either asked for it or you need to lift that restriction, you just need to let them know that that has been lifted. Now I'm aware there's a lot of legal jargon and rights and things going in. It will make more sense as you go through. And when you think about it, some of these things aren't massive changes to what we've got. It probably has just been a long while since someone stood in front of you all and gone through all of this. So one of the things we'll go through in a bit as well is about getting that picture of all this data that you store in your schools and how you use it. So if any questions come out of any of that, or you're not sure about why you've got it and if you need to, then the HR team, we're all here to help you. So I don't think you've got to memorise all this and then just know where you're going with it all. But there is a test later. No, it's not really. Okay, so subject access requests. So So as I said, this is a right that we have currently. Now the changes are that schools and employers can no longer charge the £10 administration fee, and there's a change from 40 calendar days to 30 calendar days. So it has made it a tighter restriction on that, and it is possible that although it wasn't massive amount of money that you could charge, because that's been taken away, it might mean that more people are requesting to see what's held. Okay. Right, so if somebody does make a request, and that's usually, it could be an email, it could be by someone posting something on the school website or Facebook. Requests for subject access requests can come in from any form. So it's conscious being aware of that timeline. Now the timeline also applies whenever it's made. So it will be calendar days, not working days. So what you'd need to have is some kind of way of dealing with it if it's receiving summer holidays. So it wouldn't be enough to say, look, none of us are in school during those 6 weeks, so therefore we can't do it. It doesn't start again in September. You still need to comply with that. So what we'll do is send out from HR team some very clear guidance on how you would go about managing it. So you don't need to sort of try and work it all out yourself. Be very clear about what that process is. It is possible to extend that period by a further 2 months if the request is complex or numerous requests are being made. So some of it will be very precise. So like say a former employee might just say, I just want to have a look at my file to see what's held about me for disciplinary. Now if it's outside of that period that you needed to keep it, the hope is that there isn't any information on there. You would have got rid of those files. So, but if it's something like, I want to see absolutely anything that you hold about me, I want to see it by all forms on texts and emails, as you can understand, that's going to be quite an onerous task. So one of the things is really finding out exactly what information is it that someone's requesting. Because it's easy, sometimes they say, I just want to hold it. If you can ask some questions and you can find out what it is, it stops you thinking, right, I've got to absolutely check everything. So if that you are saying that it is a very difficult case or it's very numerous requests coming through, you have to be very clear about why. You can't just say, you haven't had time to get round to it, therefore I'm extending it. It has to be very clear about those reasons for the delay. You can also charge a reasonable fee if the request is manifestly unfounded or excessive. Now this is one of the things that I mentioned, because we've only got a draft bill of the new Data Protection Act, we haven't got some clear guidance on what manifestly unfounded or excessive is. Because what to us might be, when you're dealing with everything else, the requirements of the school, might be manifestly unfounded or excessive. It might not necessarily mean what it is by law. So we are still waiting for some guidance from the government when it comes to doing the actual act of what that actually means. Now ID is obviously really important because you need to take all reasonable steps to check that the person to whom you're giving that information is the person that they say they are and they have the right to do it. So the same like all the checks that you do for somebody picking up any of the children in your schools, you're making sure that they are who they say they are and they are somebody that's permitted. Because the request for children can come through a parent or through a guardian, it's taking those steps to make sure that they are entitled to that information. Because obviously what you don't want to do is gather all this information, spend this time, get it, and then send it to somebody who isn't actually entitled to see it, because then you're in foul of a breach of that data protection. So I'd say things like ask them to bring in identification. If it's not a parent and you can see that they have got responsibility, ask them to actually bring in something that proves that they are entitled to that information, they are a legal guardian. The part of dealing with that request as well is telling the requester of their right to complain to the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. So if they're not happy or if there's a delay, they have that right to complain to the ICO. And obviously, I mentioned before about that potential risk to the reputation of the trust in schools. What we don't want to do is keep getting requests and complaints through to the ICO, so we sort of start to be seen as a trust that can't manage the data.
Does it state how you give them that data? So it can be in an electronic form, or does it have to be paper, or does it sort of specify how
it's really what
share the data?
What that individual, how they're happy to receive it. So when you're finding out exactly what it covers, part of that would be, well, how do you want that information? But then what you need to do is make sure that how you're sending it is secure. So if you're sending it in the post, then recorded, registered delivery, and the same if you're emailing it, sort of password protecting it to make sure it's safe.
And is there any data that you wouldn't put in a subject access request? Is there any data that you legally, for child protection
purposes, for instance, that they wouldn't have access to?
Yes, because it is individual, it's a request, it might be, say, an email or something that refers and mentions other individuals. Because that's not their personal data, you would then redact it. So yeah, if it's, as you say, child protection, there's information that you can't give because it will put that child at risk, then you're absolutely within the rights to redact it. So what I'd say is if you do get a request, we're there to help you, but it's worth, and there's some things that we've had some subject access requests already that we've run through past the employment lawyers as well, just to make sure we're redacting everything we need to. Because there's, the amount of emails you say, if there's a meeting or something, it involves more than one. So you just need to be careful that you're taking out that bit. So yes, you're quite right. Wouldn't necessarily be everything. Okay. So, information security. Now, as I said, so we've mentioned about making sure if you are passing on that information, that you're taking all reasonable steps to protect it. So there is an obligation to employers, to yourselves as holders of that information, to make sure that there are in place appropriate technical and organisational measures. Now, technical could be things like the IT system that's used, how you're sending that information around. If, like I say, you're using a portal is the best way because it's protected, but if you are emailing personal data, taking those reasonable steps to password protect it, and then don't put the password, as I have seen in the email with the password protected document, which I have seen before. There's also to say that rather than emailing it, because if an email address is hacked, to send that password in another format, so either by text or by ringing somebody to let them know, because obviously if someone can access the emails, they can access that as well. But also about organisational measures, because if you think we're looking at paper data as well as email bits you hold in the system, it's about taking reasonable steps. So like your employee files, keeping in a locked cabinet or a locked room, SEN folders, behaviour folders, making sure they're not left, that anybody can access them. So being really careful about what it is that you're holding. In a few slides, again, we'll go through the information audit, and part of that really is to have a proper look at what information is it that you're holding. Because when you start to go back, as soon as you look into it, you think, you notice things that you might not have done before, think, okay, that actually shouldn't be there, that's being held in a place that it shouldn't be. And one of the organisational measures will be staff training. So that's why we're running these series of workshops, that we're giving yourselves and other staff information about what it is. We've also sent the presentation to all the head teachers, and what we're asking for them to do is to present to all the staff within the school. Because obviously you can manage your data, the head teachers can manage it, but if other staff are releasing information potentially about parents or about pupils, we need to be mindful of that. So it's all about training, so people are aware of what information they hold and how they need to use that. Areas of the greatest risk. So most of the fines issued by the ICO are because of information security breaches. And these can be anything from leaving a bag on the train, say that holds, you've got records there that can have spreadsheets printed out, or you can have any kind of data that might identify children, or it could be to the ones that you do usually see in the press, that say like a phone company, say, is emailed out to millions of customers, all the personal information, driving licence numbers. So it's really about that information getting out and making sure there are reasonable steps in place to protect that, whether it's something you're sending out, whether it's an IT requirement. And as I said, we are working with the central IT team to make sure they look at all of those aspects of it as well. Okay, so information security. Governors' email addresses. What do you use in the schools at the moment? Do they have a work school email address? They use their own ones, their work one?
The problem is they never check the one issued in the one under the school domain. They tend to use and it's not necessarily personal. Sometimes, a couple of governors, one is a head teacher in another school and one is
right.
Assistant head. So it is a work email address, but we created for each and one of them under our own domain.
Don't use it.
Accessed, so the only way to actually get the information is the
right.
work email address.
Yep, that's fair enough.
Put an email out, we have a Dropbox.
Right, great. Yep. So I think, yes, there's, from what I've heard, there's a whole variety. Yep, Dropbox is great because it means a central, secure place. And yeah, I've heard that from a lot of schools, that you try and do everything you can to set it up, but they don't use it. Things really to be conscious there is if governors are using either their home email address or a work one, is that it's very hard for us, for school, for trust, to be aware of what safety measures. You know, if you send it to a governor and they're using their home iPad and then that's accessible by anyone in the family, then that's a way of that information getting out. And the same for work. We don't know how secure those systems are. And the same as if there was a subject access request, that would mean needing to go into their work email address to find out any of that information. So the thing is either, a Dropbox to share it, or to set them up with school or REAch2 email addresses. Now, part of the training we're also doing is training for governors. So on last Friday, we had a governor conference and we did a session on GDPR there, and we'll also have one for North Central as well. So what it'll do is, like, hopefully both ends, that we're saying, you know, yourselves can be responsible for setting them up, but obviously the governors need to use them. So it's not enough to say that they don't want to access another email address. If it's been set up, and that's how they're being sent the information, they need to get it from that way or a Dropbox, because then that's just something we can control, the information that's getting out. But I appreciate, sometimes it's hard to get them to use it. So if we can train them and we can make them be aware of why we're doing it and why they need to access it from that way, then hopefully we can overcome those issues. But I'd say a Dropbox is the easiest way, because they can access that from a secure place, and you're being sure that that information is secure.
The only problem with that, LGFL is blocking Dropbox. We tried as a network for business manager to create one to share information, and LGFL is completely blocking access. So yes, it is a more secure, but we have...
It's very secure, because no one actually can access it. Yeah, okay. I think things like that will, if we're aware of them, we can look at the reasons to why they are and come up with something that's pragmatic. Because I think a lot of these, it's easy to sort of like lock it down so completely that we're being really careful, but if no one can actually access anything, we'll have to sort of get more of a solution that works.
I mean, it can be done, it's just then removing those restrictions to Dropbox.com.
Yeah, okay, so we might need to look into that. What I'd say as well about sending out information is about the use of BCC. So that one is, blind carbon copying is a great way of making sure that you can't see anything else. So say if you're sending out a whole load of parents, if you're using the BCC function, it means other parents can't see the email addresses of everyone else. If you're sending out something that you can't, you're making sure that you're not sharing that information. Use BCC to be safe, because then you can't access anything else. And it also prevents that one person that always replies to all rather than just replies to you and goes to everybody. So it's probably quite good practice if you are sending out to a group anyway, even if it's an internal thing with school email addresses. If you get into the habit of doing that when you are doing a group, it helps keep that safe and those unnecessary emails back. Okay. Right, so information held on a computer. So the data protection does cover information to whatever form it's held in, but it's about having those appropriate technical measures. It's about having access permissions. So if you have a system, making sure people aren't sharing their password, because you have it very secure about making sure you can only access one part. But if they're then giving out their email, their log-on details to somebody else, that obviously affects that security. Rules about where files and information should be saved. So the main thing is really to avoid staff saving data to personal workspaces, but using remote access to systems wherever you can, to make sure that they're saved in a secure place, in an area that can be dealt with, that can be really secure, rather than saving it to home. Avoid easy passwords. So I don't know if anyone's making note, I have got those ones. Like password 123, also bad. And prohibiting personal email addresses. Now, one of those areas as well is not only to governors, but if staff are emailing information back to the home email address to work on, that is something that really needs to get out, that shouldn't be used. And that's dealt with through training that you're giving to your staff at schools, the head teachers will be running through, but also the information that we'll give out. Because obviously as soon as it's sent to the email address, we can't control the security of that, and it is possible that somebody else has got access to that email address and can see the data. And I've said about the emails to multiple recipients.
One issue is we use a lot of supply stuff.
Mm-hmm.
supply teacher, and obviously they need to mark attendance and things, but they will access the MIS. And I know you can create a different password every time, but you can't really put them every time, because you can't just add someone just with the basic. You need more than the name to create, or create the one which is called supply teacher and things like that. So it's quite an onerous task if you have to do that while they're in a rush to get into the classroom.
So how do they do that now? How
At
do
the
they?
moment, I think if the teacher is actually in, they leave it accessible to the supply, which is not great.
No.
Couldn't you just have, you could just have the one profile with one password and you just limit what they can access, so they can literally only access to mark down attendance. They can't access any personal information about the children or anything else. You just completely restrict all the permissions. So it doesn't matter who uses that profile, even if it's the same password every time, all they can do is mark attendance. They can't do anything else.
I mean, I think with all of this, when we start get a picture, is those kind of practical issues that means you think about it. Yeah. Yes. So MIS somewhere is a subject at the moment, and obviously we've gone through that process, and it will be announced. So because of that, because there will be a trust-wide system, that will involve looking into what those systems are in place, and hopefully it'll make things like that a little bit easier. We can set up some rules. But I think as you're going through the audit and you're having a look at what information you hold and how you share it, if there are any areas like that you're not sure how you can set up so something that actually works, let us know and we can have a chat and see how other people do it. Okay, so another question, all about sort of one of those, one about passwords. We're all aware that I've certainly known many people in the past that have got a post-it on their computer next to it with all the passwords written. Obviously quite bad, because there's the urge of actually having them written down. But it's all about those reasonable steps. So if you are having somebody that's writing the passwords down, then, and they have to write them down, making sure that's in a secure way, not something that can be accessed by a filing cabinet, say, that somebody else can get into. So if you've gone to the efforts of making sure that passwords are there, just making sure that they're really secure as well. Okay, so gone into about electronic information going round. Paper files. So this is all about being conscious about what it is that you're storing. Now, as I say, HR, I can't see us ever really going paper-free, because of just the amount of paperwork that it means, but it's all about making sure that there's no duplication. So have you got various copies of things held in different ways? Obviously, in the employee file, there's a certain amount of information that you have to hold. So you'd need to hold, you've got the right to work, you'd need to have the information about that individual. But again, let's say about making sure you've got the security measures, making sure it's locked, it's in a filing cabinet that no one else can access unless they need to for the role. So make sure it's kept under lock and key. Make sure that, again, if it's locked, it's not somewhere where everyone else can access it. And it's worth thinking about not just for yourselves to what information you hold, but what else is held around the school. So is there, staff will have their own files, making sure those are secure as well. So are they kept in a locked cabinet at the end of the night, or are they kept out on a desk so that anybody that came in, so say the cleaners we want around the school, would they be able to access? So if they have got its own pupil behaviour, say, or SEN files, again, making sure that those are secure and that those are stored somewhere. Taking information off site as well. So one of the requirements is keeping that safe. Now, we have in other sessions as well, you don't have to have a secure core behind you, making sure that everything's there, but taking reasonable steps. So if one of your members of staff is going out on say a trip or an event, in just a padlock on the back on their rucksack, it's an easy step that you can take to make sure that that's secure. If teachers are taking books home, and they still can do that, they need to carry out the role, we're not saying they can't, but taking reasonable steps, making sure they're not left in a car overnight, making sure they're not left on the train, taking without big firm case that's handcuffed to them, making sure that they're as secure as they can be, and if it can be just a padlock or some kind of lock case, then that's better, because that's one of those easy breaches that you can do that we've either done or we've known people that have left something on a train, say. Okay, one of the other, obviously we've sort of touched upon that briefly about personal email addresses, is about people that do work from home, that do take things home because they need to get things finished. So staff that are working from home need the tools to do that securely. And one of the key things there is either access to a Dropbox or having remote access from home. So they're not having to email themselves data that they're then going to store on a personal computer. They can access all the systems as they would if they were at the school. And again, I said about taking records home, making sure they're secure. Staff working on the go. So say like myself, within South Central, I travel around to all the schools, being conscious that I'm not taking everything with me I need each time. Well, one, because physically can't actually carry it all. But also I'm minimising what I've got on me. So say if I did leave something somewhere, everything's secure, I've got the very minimum of information around with me. Being aware of surroundings. Again, if you're in a busy place, if you're somewhere in a public arena that you think it could be easy to leave something, making sure that that's secure. And if people are taking information out on school trips, making sure that that's processed, that's back under sort of school property and protected as soon as they get back. So I would say that staff, obviously have a member of staff that wouldn't have necessarily a work phone or device that would access information on their personal devices. And really about making sure part of that training that you should give to your staff is making sure that's secure. So is their personal phone password protected? Have they, is it accessible by all? Taking steps they can to keep that information safe. So it's all around those policies, the procedures, making it really clear what people need, but also giving that training. Okay. What do we think about that? What if someone loses their mobile phone? What if Neil's travelling home by train and then leaves the phone on the train? Do you think that's an issue?
Yes, if they've got work emails and text messages and things like that that identify the school or any individual in the school. Absolutely.
And the thing is now, it's so easy to use any kind of device to access it. So it's so easy that you could have a variety of devices. So yeah, absolutely. We're looking at what information is held on there. So if it's someone that has it, you'd obviously be concerned for them. But if there's no school data, we don't need to worry about that. But it's thinking about what data would there be? How easily is it accessible? Is the phone password protected? So you've got certain security things you can do there.
Would you say it's a consistent approach that staff wouldn't have school email on their phone then?
I mean,
because most of them do now.
Yeah. I mean, it is a way of finding a pragmatic solution. What we don't want to say is that there are always regulations in place so you absolutely can't do anything. If they don't need it, then I'd say that it's best to encourage them not to, because there are obviously connotations as well that the easier it is to access something, the easier it is then to look at it late at night and times where you shouldn't really be for well-being. So as much as you can steer staff towards using secure school information, the better. Now, I know REAch2 has recently obtained a contract with Vodafone for mobiles, so there is the option to use that in your own schools if there's certain people that would need work phones. So say you've got somebody regularly goes on school trips, if there's a staff phone that they can take that's protected, that would have parent contact details that you'd need for the pupils, then you've got a secure phone rather than them needing to use their own. So if they are because they want to access the emails, you can either set and say have a standard approach that no one does, which might not be practical, but if they are, it's about making sure it's protected, it's not accessible by anybody else. But I think I would, as a wider question as well, look into when people are using it and how much they're using it, because it is so easy to, people like checking emails on holiday, which for best practice isn't really a good thing for their own well-being. So I'd really look into why they're using it and when. Okay, so around information security, there are certain GDPR requirements. So one of these is around encryption, say about password protection, all reasonable security measures to keep that data safe. About keeping it protected, so hackers, it's not necessarily just someone leaving a bag or a phone on the train. Hackers can get in. I think we've seen a number of emails go around, sort of phishing emails from people that have accessed that. So it's about getting those things in place. Around testing and assessment, requirements around processors. So under the regulations, there's certain amounts around who are data controllers and who are processors, because there's information that you'll store in the school, and then you'll give it to, so DFE, you obviously have requirements to pass on information, you've got the census, you've got assessment information that goes out. It's all around protecting those systems that you've got and how that information is being shared. Now, one of the things covered under the regulations is data protection impact assessments. So this is around high-risk processing. So it's not something you necessarily need to do as a matter of course, but things like the new MIS system that's going to come in place, there'll be assessments to make sure that that meets all the requirements, that we can show compliance. But if you're aware that a lot of information is being shared, it's about doing a proper, like we do a risk assessment for anything else, an assessment to see why the information is being shared and whether you need to, and is it secure. So it's all about really that knowledge about information, being aware of what it is that you have and how you're using it. Okay, breaches. So mention that there's sort of more repercussions, more consequences of breaches. And these can be anything, as say, from hackers getting into it. It can be from information being emailed out. It can be if you are sending things out by post, about putting it to the wrong person that you sent it to. So there's obviously a number of breaches that are quite easily done that you can take steps against. So as I mentioned, part of the toolkit will be a breach policy, so some kind of guidance around what you need to do if you're aware of a breach. Because what you wouldn't want to do is like 500 people ringing the ICO to say, oh, we've done this, we've sent the information. There'll need to be a proper process to say, is it something that you can easily resolve? So say something's left on a train, you ring up the train company and it's picked up the next stop. You've taken all the steps you can to reasonably contain that information. You know everything in there is password protected, so there isn't a great risk of it getting out. If, however, though, you send an email by mistake and it goes out to all the parents with personal information about children, then that's obviously a wider breach and something that we need to be aware of and take steps against it. So in terms of the regulations, it's about setting that between there's no risk to something because it's being contained, there's a low risk or a high risk. And it's about having that guidance to which ones that will come under. And as I say about that committee, that group, we'll set that out to make it clear to who makes that decision to whether it's a high risk or not. So high risk is defined as that one that if unaddressed, the breach is likely to have significant detrimental effect on individuals. So say safeguarding information, if it goes to a lot of people that don't have the right to see it, that has a very great risk for that child, for other individuals seeing the information. There's requirements under the regulations for timelines. So notification needs to be sent within 72 hours of discovering the breach. And what we would do is maintain centrally a breach register, which will help us to show what kind of breaches are happening and how we've dealt with them, but also to see if it's the same kind of thing. So is it something that we need to do about changing our procedures? Is it sort of easy things that we can rectify and we need to look at? So building up that picture of really what those breaches are. And as I say, having that guidance will really allow us to fine-tune about if you do suddenly get it on the last day of July when no one's at the school, how do we do it to make sure that we can then deal with it, or we can meet the requests when nobody's at the school?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
If you send a letter out to a parent and then you find out later on they don't receive the letter because they've not updated their address, who's that in breach? It's not your fault.
No, if you've taken reasonable steps to make sure that you've got the correct information. I guess if there was that, if you're send regularly, you're reminding people they need to let you know if they have changed address, or you're sending out information to make sure it's accurate. But no, it's one of those hard ones because, yeah, it is absolutely their responsibility to let you know. But in a way, it would be good practice to send out, like you would to staff, to make sure you've got the correct data, to regularly send out some kind of reminder of either what you hold or to get people to come in. If you're doing that regularly and you can say, look, I've given you all these opportunities to let me know what the correct address is and they haven't, then there's little that you could have done there to send it out to somebody else. So it will, a lot of these, as with anything, will depend on the actual circumstances and what happened. But the requirement to show that you're compliant will be about saying, well, how did that happen? So you'd need to show evidence of, say I've taken this, I've sent information, you haven't let me know. You've done everything you can to try and keep your data records up to date. Because, you can only work with the information you've got if people don't let you know. Okay. So yeah, with breaches, some things, I say, it's very easy to take some immediate steps to remedy those. So it might be a matter of shutting down the IT system, say changing password. Certain devices you can remotely clear and stop anyone accessing it. And this, as I say, will all be laid out in the procedure, so you don't have to remember this and go through the steps, but it's about assessing that risk. So what information has got out? How sensitive is it? Is, if something did go to the wrong address, is it just a normal letter you send out, or is it some very protected safeguarding information? And then if it does need to be reported to the ICO, there's that timeline of 72 hours, and there may be other people that you need to inform. If it is a high risk, then the data subject needs to know that that information has got out and what steps you're taking to remedy it, so that they are aware of what's happening with their data. And part of us saying about that log of the breaches is around about identifying lessons learned and trying to make sure there's not a recurrence. Because what we don't want to see is that information is keep going through the Information Commissioner's office for the same kind of thing, but we're not actually taking any other steps to remedy it. Right, case studies that everyone loves in training. And plus, I feel I've been talking for far too long. So, there are some scenarios that we'll go through. So, just in your tables, if you just want to have a bit of a chat about what you think you need to be aware of, what are the information security issues, and what do you think Jack should do. Now, Jack's featured in quite a few of these. He's having a bad day, data protection-wise, but just have a bit of a chat in your table. And then we'll just say a couple of minutes and see what we come up with. Okay, what kind of things have you been thinking about from there? So we've done there? What kind of things? Yes, yes, definitely. Yep, absolutely. And then if he did, but yes, was misguidedly decided he had to do it himself at the last minute, what kind of things should he be aware of if he is emailing out all the parents?
It's a general email to blind copy people in, but also thinking about what he includes in the emails in case the parent then shares it on after that.
Yep, definitely. Because you can only be responsible for the information that you hold, and it's, where it goes on after that. Yep, no, definitely. Absolutely. So what about the pupils and the medical conditions? Are we holding information about that? What should he be aware of, conscious of there?
Just keeping that size.
Yeah, and how could he do that? Yeah. When your parents go out, or teachers and staff go out, do they usually have it on a device, or is it paper copies? How do they usually hold that? Paper copies, yeah. Because I think it's easy as well to say, sort of make sure it's on a secure device that's password protected. But I think we're all aware that, when you're going out on a school trip and say, or a football match, you can have a lot of paper information. So again, as you say, it's about keeping that secure, about having it in a locked bag, or at the very least sort of bag with a padlock, not being left around somewhere where other people can access it. Because obviously that's sort of very sensitive type of information.
And then ensuring that on return from that trip that it's destroyed
Yes.
appropriately, because you don't want additional copies of those sensitive bits of information.
Absolutely. Because it's easy to sort of go back and sort of shove it in a corner somewhere, and before you know it, you've got a fire risk, but then you've got a lot of information. Yeah. Any other thoughts? This table here. Addition to that? Yeah.
You have it, so when you destroy it, you need to make some vertical of destroying it. Just the other thing, you need to keep a record of everything that you destroy. And I don't know to what detail, I'm assuming it's not. I destroyed John and Billy, and I destroyed all the records taken on the school trip. That's the other thing, isn't it? That you need to keep a record even what you destroy. It's not just saying, I destroyed everything that.
Well, it depends on what information it is you're holding, what you're destroying, because sometimes you've got to be careful if your records of what you've destroyed replicate what you're destroying. In a way, it then negates destroying it because you've got the record of it. I mean, if it is just something for a school trip that you don't need, you've printed out, say, emergency contact details, you don't need to have a record of those anymore because they're stored at the school. So it's all around being thoughtful about why you actually need that information and why you're destroying it. Because yes, if you print out because you haven't got access to something on there, you've got everyone's parents' information in case you need to contact them. That's fine because you don't need to hold it anymore in that way. You can just destroy those. So I think what I'd just say there is, yes, So you're being cautious, but you don't want to make sure you're then keeping such a record that you've basically still got a record of that information. Because a lot of it will be held back at school, and that's where you need it. You only need to take it out when you are going on school trips. But yeah, certainly, ideally, Jack would have been a little bit more organised and got some support. And make sure as well that he is somebody that should have that information. So if he's there and he's responsible for the children, it's right that he would have that information because he contacts them. If it's someone else that's just going along because they fancy a jolly out of school, they might not necessarily need to have that information. So yeah, make sure they're the right person to have it. And as you say, making sure it's secure and safe when it is out and about. If he does have the information on the phone, say make sure it's password protected, but if it is paper forms, making sure it's as secure as it can be. And use BCC, as you say, to make sure that's sent out. There's one thing, it's BCC, you remember. Okay, Eileen. Okay, so this is a former employee, and she's been dismissed a few weeks ago and got this email. So again, do you want to take just a couple of minutes amongst your tables to think about what kind of things might you need to be aware of and how would you respond to such a request? Okay, has everyone had a chance to discuss this, Eileen? Okay, do you want to start this table then? What are your first thoughts? What kind of things would you need to do and be aware of?
Well, we need to verify it did actually come from her in the first place.
Yep, definitely. How would you do that?
But it all depends. We could either phone her or ask her to come in and then verify it that way.
Yep, absolutely. Because it could be someone like a malicious email or something trying to gather information. That if you have an email address that, you know, sort of we've all seen ones that aren't the most professional, is that a name, should we say, that's hard to tell. Yep, absolutely. Yep, no, great point. What would you do then if you confirmed it was her?
But it all depends exactly how long the situations are going. If it's quite a complicated situation, then we might have to ask if we can extend it.
Mm-hmm.
If it isn't, then we'll need to basically start getting any information from her.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, no, definitely. Yeah, starting point always do, as you say, make sure that is the individual that has the right to request it. Yeah. What about this table? So what kind of things would you be aware of and think about?
Definitely checking that it's her.
Mm-hmm.
Before we do anything.
Yep. And in terms of what information you'd collate, what kind of things would you think about there?
What she's asked for. Did you have to elaborate on that, or just what she's requested?
I would, so I think with all of them it's worth just having that conversation about exactly what it is that they're after. Because again, it could be, you could spend a lot of time trying to get everything that's got anything to do with it, whereas it might be something quite specific. So I think when you're doing those checks to make sure that it is that individual, it's the opportunity to really find out what is it that they require. Is it just a copy of the letter? So, 'cause it could just be they've lost the letter that you sent confirming the dismissal, or is it everything that you hold? So you're doing, to help yourselves as well, to make sure you're sure you're getting the information that they need. Yeah. About this table, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, go straight to HR.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because if that's a child protection issue, if that's
Yeah.
dismissal, or you've had to do a referral to the local authority designated officer, there's all sorts of things around that that you just wouldn't know what you could and should share.
No, absolutely.
They have most of it, wouldn't they? Anyway, because it's been the facts, wouldn't it, the disciplinary. So most of the information would already be present, you know, or given to them.
Yes.
At the hearing.
Yep.
They've already had most of it, so it'd be quite sort of, you know, you want to know what sort of extra information they're looking to get, because
Yes.
it's been shared.
Definitely.
Not able to be shared.
I guess with 2 points. One, yes, absolutely to HR, because as well we might be aware that it goes on to another case, or there might have been another related case. But also in terms of what else it could be. If they want anything, you'd have, if you like, the official file and you'd have the letters. But if they're trying to say, build a picture and say it was a predetermined decision, what they would be trying to get is emails, say, going between, going, well, we're going to sack them anyway because we want them out. Obviously, you know, there's no things like predetermined decision, but anything like that would be probably the kind of thing that they might be looking for. So it would absolutely be the pack they get, but there could well be other information that's paper notes and meetings, email exchanges or texts. So again, it comes down to really finding what it is that they need, and that will help you set the remit to do. But yeah, if we know, it could be other parts. And also when you are sending it, one thing we'll advise, we talked before about redacting information. It could be information that you've got on others as well. So making sure that you're only giving them the information that they're entitled to, and making sure you're taking out anything else that they're not entitled to see. It could be that it's so much that you need to have extra time, but it's really about, once you've determined what it is, it then gives you sort of more evidence, if you like, to say why it's going to take additional time. You know, if it's a particularly complex one that has been a big restructure, saying there's a lot of information, it's likely to be more and more stuff that you'd have to redact, because it would affect other people than if it was, say, a disciplinary dismissal, that it's just about that individual. But again, in terms of redacting, it's looking at, if, say, it was a disciplinary about safeguarding issue, you'd have a lot of information there that you'd need to take out. So being sure what it is that they're asked for, and then finding out what you've got and seeing what you need to send over is certainly something that we in HR can help with. About seeing what the files are and taking out, and again, making sure that they are who they say they are, and then confirming how they want that information. Because we talked about, is it, do you want paper copy or is it emailing it, but finding a secure way they can have it and making sure that's safe.
Conversation with a witness, because they say, I only want a letter, and then you provide them with a letter, and then they say, oh no, but I asked this, that, why didn't you give it to me? So shouldn't you have somebody there with you to witness any conversations that you might have?
It depends, I guess, with so many conversations, ones that you know might be a bit tricky, you might want it, but what you could just do is follow it up in writing to say, received your request, you've requested it, comes back in writing, this is how I send it to you, because then you've got that evidence, if you like, of giving the information.
Sorry, if you received a request, say, by telephone,
Yep.
can you request that they put it in writing? So you've got
Yes.
that?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah. Because
Does the 30 days start from the telephone call or from when you get the letter?
it starts from when the request is received. So if you've got, if it's something that it takes a while to get the other information, you could potentially argue that by the time you've sussed out exactly what it is they require, you could start it from that date. But it's all around having that evidence to prove what steps you've taken through to get up to that point. Because, but you have got to be conscious of that timeline, thinking it's 30 days. Because it might be something that you're taking a while to get really out of them exactly what it is. It would be unreasonable to think it starts from the initial point. Okay, anything else about Eileen? Jack, poor Jack. But one more scenario. So Jack is back from his school trip. It's obviously not gone well. He's very tired and he falls asleep on the train. He rushes off without his bag. So again, a couple of minutes to think through poor Jack and what should he do, and what steps, if you were aware, then what should you do? A couple of minutes to talk about that. Okay, has everyone had a chance to do that? Is everyone back in? I've got a feeling that door locks, does it, behind? So, okay, well done, keep an eye on the door. Okay, so Jack's mistake then, what do we think? What kind of things should he do? So this table here, what do you reckon Jack should do?
Well, the discussion we were having, just basics, him needing to get hold of the train company pretty quickly to make sure that he was able to sort of try and retain that bag if at all possible.
Yep.
And in terms of his responsibility towards the school to obviously let senior management know that he's lost that bag, which has got potentially sensitive information, which would go on the register, of breaches. But I suppose the other discussion we were having was that there would, you could end up with hundreds and hundreds of breaches on that register. So for example, when you mentioned best practice was actually, your books would need to be taken into a house or would need to be in a secure location, and you could have members of staff who are being very honest, saying, well, actually, I stayed at my girlfriend's house this weekend and I left my books in the back of the car. And I suppose it's about sort of preaching what is best practice and then what you really need to know. And in this case, obviously, because they're books, it would be quite obvious that they've been lost.
Yes.
Because SLT would be doing their normal monitoring, and if you've lost a couple of sets of books or a set of books, you would know about it. But we talked about when you're going on a trip and you have those information sheets about, child's medical information, all of that kind of stuff. Well, actually, you could say to Jack, well, where is that? I've got rid of it. I destroyed it on my own. So do we need a process now where actually a central member of staff signs that in and signs that out? So you have one folder with all that medical information, and that person physically has to give it back.
Yes.
So that you can make sure that that gets shredded.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea, because that isn't clear about whether what he's got relates to the school trip or not. Because yes, there should be a process of getting any information you hold on that trip back to the school. As you say, if you've got a record of knowing it's back, then that individual's done their role, if you like, and then the school has a requirement to delete it appropriately. I think it's a great idea. And really around that, it's around that training for staff. So staff do know what they need to do as well, because without anything, he might not be aware that that's something that he'd need to even think about. So if we can, again, you're right, it's identifying that it's a breach. If we can identify what steps we've taken to make sure he is aware and things that he needed to do, then that's all that we can do to try and avoid the problem. If it has done, it's then how we deal with it. So yes, you're right, it depends really on what that information is. And is it, you can contact the training company. Is it secure as well? Is it something that's lost? It's on an open bag? Is it something that's locked? If it's school books, is it, sort of in a lockable thing? If it's data, is it password protected? So it's really about seeing exactly what it is and what information it is. Yeah. Table here. Any other thoughts?
I'm just saying, to add to it, is just what level of risk it is.
Yeah.
To be honest. And then, having to inform the ICO.
Yes.
If you needed to, if it was something that was going to get out very easily.
Yes, definitely. And it is, you're quite right about that element of risk. Is it something that, like brand new school books that haven't got anything in and nothing you can really identify? Or if it is from his school trip, is it, all those medical records, all that the emergency contact information. It is about seeing what it is and what you can do. Yep. Middle table, any other thoughts?
I think a similar conversation really about the importance of accurate risk assessment in every one of these cases to see that there's no one approach that fits all. I think it is about the sensitivity of the data and how significant the breach could be.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's about doing those assessments. It's about the training, because whereas hopefully after this session you'll sort of have, if there's any gaps you did have about understanding what data is and what can be stored, but you think it's sort of teachers in the school might not necessarily think, they're just used to taking that. They might not think that's something they have to protect, and it could cause a breach and what the consequences are. So yeah, it's about having the assessments, has training being carried out, have you taken all steps you reasonably can? Definitely. We talked about remedial action, so trying to get the bag back, identifying what the level of risk is, but also notifying the data subjects. So if it is something that is a high risk, it's about saying that this has happened, but this is what we're doing to try and deal with it, because they need to obviously be involved that information has got out by a certain way, but also know what steps you're taking to try and remedy that situation. And as you say, it's about reviewing, having that record so you can review it, because although, as you say, you might have a record of lots, if it's the same kind of thing all the time, that might identify a training need or a procedure need, because there will be things that, there will be breaches.
Just from a HR point of view, because we had this discussion over here. So say, for example, you had sort of a 3 strikes policy. So if there was an individual who had come to you and sort of said, right, look, I've done X, Y, and Z, and there were 3 breaches. What, how does that feed into HR? Because obviously, quite clearly, if you've got an individual who's forgetful, or they're just going to stop telling you, aren't they? Because if they think they're going to get into trouble, if they're doing these things, they're simply just not going to tell you, so you would never ever find out. So what's the policy? What's the direction that schools would take on that?
Yeah, you're saying about 3 strikes, you're out. So that implies that you've had those discussions. They've either had a management expectations letter, or you've a verbal warning or something to say that this is not acceptable. If it's then discovered that they have breached data and they haven't reported it, then yes, that would be under the disciplinary. You'd investigate it as you would any misconduct issue, because you've got the separate notification requirements for the ICO, but you've also got your internal. But it's, if it's a one-off that, Jack was knackered from the end of his training and there's sort of reasons to why he did it and it's one-off, then that's different to someone who is repeatedly leaving information or doing things that puts your school at risk.
So again, like each school will just set its own sort of narrative around that then, will it?
I mean, the training is such a key thing, because what that's doing is saying to everybody, this is the information that you have, these are the risks, you need to be conscious that if you are taking books home, this is what you need to take. Put it in a lock case where you can. So what you're doing there is you're making sure you're setting very clear expectations of what everyone needs. If someone then repeatedly fails to follow what you've told them, then they are in breach of your school policies as well as a data protection breach, and that you then investigate it as you would a misconduct issue. So I think the same like with anything we say in HR, it's about recording that. So if you've had conversations with somebody, make sure you've got a record that you've spoken to them about the need to keep it safe. Because then if you've got a record of all those conversations and they're continuously ignoring that, then you've had that and you've got the rights then to investigate it as you would a disciplinary.
If the school or the trust got fined, theoretically, does the individual get fined as well?
No, because it would, so the REAch2 would be known as, we're the sort of the trust that holds that data, and obviously within schools that you do, but it would be on the organisation. You would then follow your internal procedures, so like disciplinary, as you would for that. I mean, because the fines really are a percentage of the turnover, it's not something, as a school, we've got the money to be able to, we don't have a receiver turnover, we don't make a profit to be able to take that percentage. So it is then, as I said, the reputation. So that would be part of the discussions you'd have. You know, you've breached the policy, as say there'll be data protection policy that will be issuing out. So it's a breach of that and other conversations that you've had. So you would follow the disciplinary for that. Yeah, they can't write a cheque and then get out of it that way. Right.
I was thinking more of the lines that when we have training with the staff to say that this is all changing, that you could explain it's not just the school that got fined, but the individual, and it might think twice about if they had to lay out something, they'd think twice about just leaving stuff and not thinking about it.
No, I mean, if you're having those discussions, part of it knowing that it would be a breach of the policy and that you would pursue disciplinary action if they continued not to do it, because then obviously ultimately the ultimate sanction would be dismissal if you follow it through and someone continuously ignores it. That's obviously quite a big consequence to them, but it would have to be that rather than a financial. Yeah. Anything else about that, about things that you, Jack, should be aware of or you think you as a school would need to think about? I think, I've got all the key points there. We said about just keeping it secure and making sure, we said there about the minimum of information that you need, that if it was some relating to the school trip, it's about dropping that back up at the school. So if he had data, if it was just school books, it's because he needed that to mark at home. He hasn't got any other information that he didn't need to be carrying around with him, because obviously it can easily collate a lot of information throughout the school trip on that. So it's being sure about he's only got what he needs to have. Okay, so in terms of sport, and I've mentioned a few times about information that's coming out, so if we just run through that. Okay, so aware that 25th of May is looming, we're not that far off. So one of the things I mentioned was about the information audit. Now this is different from other audits that you might have. It's not somebody coming in externally to have a look and for you to justify where you've got it. It really is for you within the schools to have a clear picture of what it is that you hold. Because we've talked about here about quite a lot of information that you have, but when you start to actually look at it and you break it down, it often is more than you think that you've got. So the audit is for your purposes to say, okay, what is it that I store at the school? Why am I storing it? And I mentioned those 6 lawful bases for having it. And then am I keeping it for the time period that I need to? Now, hopefully this week in the next couple of days, we'll be sending that out to all of you. So it'll go to head teachers and to SPMs. And what that'll have is a spreadsheet for recording all that information. The delay has been, is what we've tried to do is populate it with as much of things that we're aware of, because we know obviously in HR a certain amount of information that you will hold. That's not to say that if you've got extra you can't add it, but we wanted to give you something to work from rather than a blank spreadsheet. So it will have some information in there to what we think you hold on pupils, what we think you hold on staff, and we'll give some guidance on why you hold it. But it's really a say internally for you, just to build a picture of what it is that you have. What can you see as the possible risks? So we've talked about school trips, but is there anything else that data's being taken out from a way that you need to think about it? Is it what training do you need to give to your staff? Can you make sure they hear those messages and they can put things in place? one of the things is about updating our data protection and retention policies. So we'll send out a draft data protection policy and also retention. So I say that will lay out for each area what the guidance is on how long you should be holding that information. Because obviously there's certain requirements to hold it for job applicants, we were talking about earlier, to staff, to safeguarding information, having the longest of the timelines. So that you'll have, which will be very clear about each bit of data, how long do you need to keep it for, and then destroying it. And again, it's about, at that point, you are destroying it, about destroying it in a secure way. So as you all know, you're not just sticking it in your bin, you'd be shredding it, anything else that you would to make sure that's securely deleted. Privacy notices, I mentioned earlier, and we'll be sending out templates for those as well, because there'll be privacy notice for staff, the information you hold on them, but also for externally for parents of the children. So again, about being very clear and transparent to meet that requirement, about saying, this is who we are, this is the information that we hold about you, this is why we're holding it. And if it is something that we're gaining consent on, again, making sure that people are aware that they've got the right to withdraw that consent if they need to, if it's applicable. And as I said, you're not holding it for another reason. Awareness amongst staff, so that's the reason why we're doing these sessions. And what we're also doing is putting together an FAQ, which we'll keep as a live document and we'll add to. But we've done various sessions, we're sort of building up quite a stock of questions. So if there's any more that come through that, I'd say, come and grab me after this, or email me or Fiona, or any of us in HR, then I can answer that, and then we'll also add it to the FAQs, because obviously there's a lot of questions that have come up in all the sessions. Data Protection Officer. So if any of you that have read about this, there's a requirement to appoint a Data Protection Officer. That official role will stand at MAT level, and we're still making the final decision over who that will be. It could well be an external appointment, but it will be that person who's responsible for getting the policies out and being that named person. At this rate, we'll have done everything by then, because we've got all the policies that we're working on, but there has to be one named person. So it doesn't need to be one per school. I know some areas that have got worried, especially SBMs, that it's going to fall on you as well as everything else. What it probably will be is that there'll be a data protection officer, say at that level, and there'll be representatives that will need to know, but we're still finalising exactly who that will be. But don't think that you have to allocate a data protection officer within your school. And rechecking consent. Now, when I mentioned about consent with things like photos, if your current consent forms meet all those requirements, and as I say, we'll send out a template in the pack, you don't need to do a whole process of getting that consent. But because, and a lot I've seen tend to be opt out if you don't want your child's photo used, it might be that you just need to reissue those. And that will be about being very clear why you need to use those photos and how long, and making it really clear that they've got the right to withdraw that consent. Because although that might, if you've got your website redone and you've got photos and you're having to then take it off, yes, that is a hassle, but that is unfortunately something you need to do to demonstrate compliance. Okay, so what we'll be giving is a policy toolkit. So I think we've already, if you've seen the presentation currently, so what we've got still to come out is some policies and the information audit, and where that's sort of the key thing, if you like, because that's going to involve the work going in and to build up that picture. But so we just wanted to make sure we can put some information in there for you. We'll send out all of those forms. Yep, got the training slides if you want to use that to go through with your staff. Because I am aware there's quite a lot of slides and there's a lot of information to go through. And it's that balance between making sure that your staff have got all the information they need, but not going into it in more detail than you need. But because there is quite a lot they need to be aware of, it's entirely up to you whether you want to use the slides or adapt your own. And one of the other things to say will be subject access requests. So information more about how to recognise them, how to deal with them, who you need to inform, so you can manage that process as well.
Can I just ask what the timeline is on receiving these?
So they had been delayed slightly because we're working with a governance team, but I'm hoping that those will go out by the end of this week. They're pretty much there to go. And certainly the information audit is one I'm pushing to go out sooner rather than later. So hopefully in the next couple of days. Okay, so leads me in nicely, the information audit. That's one of the first steps in showing that compliance, because what that's saying is that we're looking at what kind of information we hold, and we can then assess the needs and what we need to do with it. So that's hopefully going to come out as well the next couple of days with some guidance and notes. And what we're doing in HR as well with governance is seeing what kind of things do we think additional training's needed. So we'll possibly be putting together some webinars or some other training on how do you deal with a subject access request. So what kind of things will regularly come up to provide a whole package of training and support for that. But in the meantime, obviously, myself or Fiona or anyone within the HR team, if you've got a question, let us know. Okay, so one of the key things and reason we talked about having all these processes in place is about demonstrating compliance. So setting those clear responsibilities so you know as a head teacher or as an SBM or someone within a school or central team what your requirements are and then what you need to do to notify somebody else. So say if there's somebody, the group that's going to make the decision on whether it's a high risk, being very clear about who that is. Data protection officer, so we are looking at all the options currently, but it will be somebody centrally and that will be communicated as soon as we have that information. Audit, that will be going out to a home near you and going through that. And I say there will be guidance, but if you need some more information or you need just someone to run through that, then give any of us a shout. And breach reporting. Again, that'll be centrally, but it'll be a process of, as I say, getting that information together so we can see what kind of stuff's coming up and what we need over and above what we're doing currently. Okay, so in terms of what central team's doing, it's awareness, training is one of these sessions, the toolkit, and giving those policies and guidance. And then in terms of the timeline, a way that we're aware that we're getting worryingly near the middle of it. But the information audit, we've got as a rough date of the 16th of April. And as I said, no one's coming out to your school. It's not something that you need to send in centrally. But it's a way then, if you can get it completed by then, it gives us a bit of time before the 25th of May to work with you if there's any areas that you think there's some gaps or something that you're concerned about. So it just gives that bit of extra time before the 25th of May. And then as we go through, as I say, we're working with the governance team to produce those policies and also those templates, so privacy notices, your consent forms that you can compare to what you're sending out currently and see if you need to change those. And then as we go on, it's a matter of just sort of monitoring that you can see how that's working. Do you think more training is needed that we can, because it's obviously not something that we hit the 25th of May, go, yay, and then think we're done. It's something that we're going to need to look at as we go through. Okay, so the information audit, that's, as I say, going to help you see what kind of data you hold and see what you need to do. And it will look into purposes, the sources of the information, how you collect it, who has responsibility, where it's shared as well. So is it sharing because you need to with DFE? Is it being shared with any other third party? And just identifying those areas and making sure that it's being retained for the right amount of time and no longer. And as I say, that's going to help to demonstrate the compliance. Because although it's not going to be collected in, if you like, what it will mean is that if anything comes out, it's another form of evidence that you've got to show that you've assessed your data, you've taken all reasonable steps you can to see what it is you hold and what you need to do with it and how you need to train people. I'd like to put a snippet of something that I'm sure no one can read, but just to build anticipation for when that's sent out to you. But so hopefully that's going to come out in the next sort of day or two. Okay, and accompanying it will be some a briefing paper around giving some more information around those audits, as well as, say, those FAQs that will give some more specific information. Okay, as I say, you've got a number of people. So Cassie Lee as Sue Northend's PA, someone to send it through, but obviously Fiona's, I think, the HR business partner for most of you in the room, or to myself. If you've got any other questions that you think of after time have gone, then get in touch with any of us and we'll do our best to answer them. Any other questions or comments or anything before?